Did you know it was possible for puff puff to explode? Yeah, I learned the hard way. This is a cautionary tale to let food experiments lie. So I was curious and decided to search for sourdough donuts, well, donut holes, otherwise known as puff puff, to see if it was possible. Because the science, to be honest, made sense. And I had seen a couple people try different recipes, so I decided, why not? Let's try to make sourdough puff puff. Now, last year, 2020, in the pandemic, there were lots of people making sourdough bread at home. So, what you need to do is create a starter. And to do that, well, some people use whole grain flour, whole wheat flour, whatever that flour is called. I just use all purpose flour. And I use yogurt because, I mean, that's how you get the starter going. You need, essentially, a sourdough starter is like yeast, replacing yeast. So, that's essentially what I was trying to do, create yeast in my own kitchen. So, by day 2, things were looking a little up. I'd left it for 24 hours in a warm place. And so the mixture had lightened up completely. It wasn't as thick as I left it yesterday, which is typically what you need to expect when doing these things. So what you're supposed to do every single day is you feed the starter. And how to do that is so the ratio is essentially 1-1-2. So if you're doing cup, 1 cup of the starter, 1 cup of water, and 2 cups of flour. But in this case, I had a really small amount. So I was doing 1/8 of a cup of starter from the previous day, 1/8 of a cup of water, and half a cup or quarter cup of flour. But what I did each day was I'd take the starter that I'm supposed to throw out. I would mix some flour in there just so that we could see if a puff puff fried from that starter would look like a puff puff. In the mixing, it had all the elements of puff puff. It was stretchy. But in frying, the puff puff on the outside was pretty hard. It was crunchy in the same way sourdough bread would be crunchy. But inside of the puff puff was bread-like. So I had some hope. By day 3, the bubbles had formed. So when you leave yeast to proof, this is exactly what it looks like. So I was very happy with my result on day 3 in terms of the starter, and it had all the pull of regular yeast. So I decided to feed the starter the same way, take out all of the starter, pour back 1/8 of a cup of the starter, 1/8 of a cup of water, and a quarter cup of flour. And from there, of course, I mixed flour back into the starter. I mixed the starter itself and covered that. But what I also noticed is that by day 3, the fermentation smell was there. It smelled like if you were baking bread or if you were drinking palm wine, that yeasty smell was there. So I was feeling very happy with this. By the time I fried it, I had gotten a few perfect pieces. The puff puff was rounded. It had the right swell. The skin was smooth. It wasn't as crusty as the first day. It was soft to touch, and when you broke into it, it had the bread-like properties of puff puff. I promise you, this was one of the best results I'd had. I wasn't even expecting it to be this good, but it was very bread-like. It was very puff puff-like. But we keep moving. Even if you find the right thing, you just keep moving.
I not hear word. I not hear word. I get coconut head.
Now my coconut head made me try to keep the starter for 2 days instead of 1. In all fairness, one of the days was really cold, so my starter just didn't do anything by day 4. So I decided to wait till day 5, kept it out in the sun. But what that did was it started to separate the liquid a bit. So by the time I'm pouring it, you'll see that the liquid from the starter separates from the actual starter. That's something I noticed. But the fermentation smell was still there, very strong. So I decided to feed the starter yet again. Water, flour, and a bit of the starter. The texture of the mix was looking right, same as the day before. I even decided to keep it for a bit just so that it could swell a bit or rise a bit, in my opinion. But my mixture, by the time it was fried, came out rock hard and flat. So I was kind of wondering what I did differently. So was it just day 3 luck, or, was it the fact that I kept it 2 days? But by day 6, I had some good bubbles in my starter again. So I was feeling confident about it again. Same process, pour the starter out, put some water, put some flour, and put the starter back. And then, of course, I decided to fry it. I didn't keep the mixed dough for too long. I just mixed it and fried it because the mixture was looking mad smooth and I was really happy about it. Except this happened. The puff puff exploded in the oil on my face. So I decided to fry again much later when I had cleaned my wound in a pancake puff pan, but it came out really rock hard and flat again, obviously, because it wasn't deep fried. So I started to Google why it would probably explode, and there were a lot of suggestions from Google, but one of the suggestions was carbon dioxide sometimes is trapped, and then if it's trapped with the moisture content in the donuts, it causes it to explode in hot oil. So at least I was happy I wasn't the only one that was going through this. So this is the day after the burn. The things we do for food science, food experiment. Anyway, this is the last batch, unfortunately, that I will be doing for this experiment. Oof. I guess the thing had started to rise a little lots in there. I'm just gonna show you how the goodness of the bubbles or the carbon dioxide has happened. So I'm gonna pour the active starter thingy-majig. Figure out what measurements to use for this. I think maybe half a tablespoon. Seems like a lot. When you're using yeast, use 1 teaspoon. I'll check. When I checked, you actually need 1/3 of a cup of starter to about 2 teaspoons of yeast, actual dry yeast. So I decided to add the rest of the starter. After doing this, I left my mixture to rise for a few hours. This is the final day. So I'm about to fry my final batch, and I'm going to use this batter dispenser to put in the oil, and then I've allowed the mixture rest for a bit, so I'm going to use the batter dispenser to put in the oil and fry from a very far distance, and yeah, see if anything happens. Progress, we'll see. I'll let you know. This is softer. Flat. So that's what I'm frying, but I'm over here hiding because I'm not trying to have this happen to me again. So we're just watching from here. It's not going great, just FYI, so I don't know that there's any point continuing with this experiment. Anyway, today's the last day. I used the last of the starters, but I'm varying the flour quantity just to see if that makes a difference. So let's take this out of the oil because I'm already panicking. Bye. So these are the ones that I did with the pancake batter dispenser. They came out flat for some reason. Started absorbing a lot of oil, but they're softer just to the touch. These ones rather, I use my hand, but I had to lighten the mix a little bit because it's coming out even harder than buns, to be honest. I haven't opened it, but it's quite rock hard, so I'm going to open it now. So from the inside you can see that it's not all the way cooked, so there was really no point trying to do this really humongous ones. So some of them are coming out soft, not the shape, not the desired shape, and I've done everything technique wise to get the desired shape, but there's softness, flat for some, but bread-like, but absorbs, these ones absorb a lot of oil. I think this too as well. Now, although there is softness on the outside, it doesn't look cooked on the inside. It's just absorbing a lot of oil. Hi, it's day 9. So 2 days after the puff puff experiment, the sourdough puff puff experiment is done, and the scars of the trade. I have crispy brows now. I'm hoping this heals quite nicely and I can move on from the scar and just avoiding all the questions of what happened to your face, what happened to your face. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the sourdough puff puff experiment. Why did I do it? I thought that the idea seemed really close to what puff puff, the premise of puff puff is. And to be honest, by day 3, I technically achieved what I was looking for. But normally you keep sourdough starters, I guess, till day 7 to bake the bread, just so that there's more structure in the bread. So what that means is, you know, those big holes, if you've never had a sourdough bread, please Google it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Those big holes in the structure of the bread, it gives a really beautiful structure. The bread is kind of crunchy and crispy, and if it's not your thing, it's not your thing, which makes sense. And even the sour taste is there. Taste wise, I mean, if when I added sugar to the mix, it worked just as fine. But I also realized that it took a while for the puff puff to brown when it didn't have sugar in the mix at all. So that also was something to note. But yeah, day 6 was interesting with that explosion. I think my friends think I'm kind of crazy because I've been laughing about it since, and I was like, well, I mean, I cook for a living now, so technically these accidents are expected, but this one in particular was very unexpected because it's puff puff. I mean, I've fried puff puff so many times and it's never exploded in my face. So I guess some of the things to note is when you're mixing, mix properly, because I think maybe there might have been an air pocket somewhere in there when this explosion happened, and it exploded in my face while I was trying to take it out because it was done frying. But clearly that carbon dioxide was expanding. I think, I'm only assuming this because of the things I googled. Any food scientist, please feel free to correct me, but from what I could see, even when it exploded, you could see the wet part of the puff puff. So that means there was still some moisture in there because it hadn't cooked all the way through inside. So that happened. And even when I took it off the heat and left it on the floor, it also exploded out of the pot. So obviously there was something maybe in the mix, maybe in me not leaving it to rise sufficiently. It could have been anything, to be honest. My verdict, you could still try it. Please wear a face shield when you're frying puff puff. I guess it's something to just mention, just because. Always leave things to rest, especially with fried dough or anything, you know, you're making. I think there's a reason why they say leave dough to rest or leave your mix to rest. It's just so that there's an expansion time and there's a science time that happens with that. But that being said, I quite liked the experiment and the process of doing that. Will I do a sourdough puff puff again? Maybe not, because I don't know that it's worth the trouble that it required to do. If I'm making sourdough bread, that's very different. I'll keep the starter. It's not a lot of work. It's just every day at some point I'm going back to feed it with flour, water, and a bit of the starter. If I'm trying to make the bread, that's fine. But for puff puff, I mean, there's active dry yeast. Although, if you run out of yeast, you could do this till day 3. As long as you keep the starter in a warm place, your bubbles will form. Let the dough rest, mix it with some flour, and you should be good. Hope you've enjoyed this recap of the video. It took me a while to get it done, but I hope you enjoy the video that I've made, and please share it with people around you. I think the knowledge in itself is power. Forget the explosion, don't share because of that, but just share because you learned something from this process. And I'll continue trying more experiments. Hopefully they're not as painful as this. All right, thank you so much. Please like, share, comment, all of that good stuff. Follow the page. It's the Puff Puff series from the Afrolems page. Bye.